Hey, what's going on everybody, and welcome back to another Mr. McGuinty's How-To Guides. I'm your host, McG, and today we're here for another exciting install. This time around, it's going to be the MK6 GTI SF intake by COBB Tuning. Let's get to it. Tuning is required after installing this product. Check your instructions for off-the-shelf map selection. Alright, tools required for this install will be a 3/8 drive socket, 7, 8, and 10mm socket, 5mm hex key, 3/8 hex key, nose clamp pliers, flathead screwdriver, T25 Torx screwdriver, T30 Torx socket, and a T20 security Torx driver. Start by pulling the engine cover off. Next up, disconnect the mass airflow sensor and set the wiring harness to the side. Now, using your T30 Torx socket, go ahead and remove the rearward facing bolt that holds the intake tube in place. Once you free the intake tube from the bracket, you'll want to go in and unclamp the turbo side and airbox side of the intake tube so it can be removed. With the intake tube ends freed, you should have full access to the PCV tube for removal. You can use a flathead screwdriver to gently pry on the tabs. Be careful though, they are made out of plastic and can crack very easily. With all the other components out of the way, you should now be able to clamp down on and remove the remainder of the silicone attached to the turbo inlet. Moving to the front of the engine bay, remove the top portion of the air channel. At this point, your guide may tell you to pull out the remainder of the intake tube, but we're going to show you a way to take the entire airbox out as one solid unit. Using your T25 Torx bit, go ahead and unscrew the two bolts that hold the air channel in place. At this point, you should be able to pull up on the intake tube and then just pull the air channel out. Now grab your 5mm hex key and remove the mounting bolt at the rear of the airbox. We're just about ready to pull the airbox, but before we do, I do have to pause for a second to give you some additional information. There are two variants of the engine in this vehicle, the CCTA and the CBFA. The vehicle we are working on is a CCTA variant. The CBFA variant of this vehicle has additional parts similar to what is shown here, which currently needs to be disconnected, that are required for states with higher emission standards. Portions of the remainder of the uninstall and reinstall cannot be shown on this vehicle as the parts do not exist. However, they are very straightforward and provided in the PDF instruction manual provided by COBB Tuning. And lastly, though this vehicle does not have the parts required, please continue on if you do have a CBFA engine, as we will show you screenshots and the proper steps needed to reconfigure your vehicle. Okay, now that everybody is up to speed, it's time to remove the airbox as a whole. The one thing you'll need to be mindful of is this tube that rests on top of the intake tube. Get a good grip on the airbox and pull up on it to pop it out of the ball sockets. Then reach down and pull the drain hose out. You do not need to disconnect it, it will come out as one long piece. Then simply rotate the airbox counterclockwise and pull it out. Now it's time to loosely install the bottom portion of the airbox using the original T25 Torx bolts that you previously removed. Once they've been finger threaded, head back and use your T25 Torx screwdriver, but do not fully tighten them quite yet. Now it's time to secure the mounting bracket to the rear of the airbox. Use the M612 flange bolt and a serrated 6mm nut through the bottom hole. Once this bolt's finger tight, go back and use another M612 flange bolt to secure the bracket to the mounting bung that you originally removed the 5mm hex bolt from. Come back with your 10mm socket and tighten them up. For those of you running the CCTA engine, it's time to thread on the 1/2" NPT plug. If you're running a CBFA engine, it's time to thread on the 1/2" NPT hose barb using a 7/8" wrench. Tighten the NPT plug down using a 3/8 hex key. Next up, using a 7mm socket or a flathead screwdriver, attach the silicone adapter 3 to 3.5 inch and 2 and 2 3/4 inch worm clamps to the turbo side of the intake tube. You can now attach the spacers to the front bracket on the intake tube using 6mm serrated nuts. With the intake tube connected, it's time to seat the silicone tube over top of the turbo inlet and press down. Once it's in place, go back and tighten up the worm clamps using a 7mm socket or flathead screwdriver. Once that's completed, it's time to secure the front half of the intake tube to the rear portion of the airbox. Gently push forward on the rear of the airbox and slide the intake tube into place. Then finger thread on the 6mm serrated nuts. Come back and tighten them up with your ratchet. With all the current parts in place, go back and tighten up all of the nuts and bolts. At this point, those running the CBFA engine will need to take the 90-degree adapter hose and connect the silicone side to the 1/2" NPT hose barb on the underside of the intake tube. You should then attach the air pump adapter to the air pump. This should just click right into place. Please note this image is just for visual purposes only and does not show the airbox that sits on top of the adapter. Now it's time to connect the COBB filter to the end of the intake tube. Secure this by using either an 8mm socket or flathead screwdriver. Make sure the filter sits parallel with the bottom of the airbox and sits as low as possible for correct airflow. Now it's time to secure the lid to the airbox using the 6 M4 button head screws and 6 4mm nylon washers. Use the provided 2.5mm hex key to tighten them down. Next up, reconnect the PCD tube to the bung in the middle of the intake tube. Now using your T20 Security Torx driver, swap the mass airflow sensor from the OEM intake tube over to the new COBB intake tube. Once the mass airflow sensor is secured, go ahead and reconnect the wiring harness. Finally, reattach the engine cover. This concludes the installation, but we highly suggest you stick around for sound bites and the post-installation product review. Okay, this product got high marks in the following categories. Superior airflow. There's literally no comparison between the OEM airbox and the COBB intake. The performance gains after the ECU has been remapped, I repeat, after the ECU has been remapped, are substantial. Next up is the sound. It just sounds wicked. It's like having a mini hurricane underneath the hood of your car. Another great thing about this intake is that the filter's cleanable. You pull it out, rinse it off, re-oil, throw it back in, and you're done. And finally is the price. It's priced right in line with all the other manufacturers, but it's made by COBB, so you know it was made right. Don't forget to stop by www.cobbtuning.com for all the other great products by COBB. And finally, don't forget to stop by and check us out on YouTube. Take it easy, everybody, and we'll see you next install.